السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم وبعد. I want to welcome all of you, whether you're new or whether you're old. We are beginning a new year, and we're talking about tonight a topic which is really very important. I was speaking with, I think, Brother Riaz, I think it was yesterday or this morning, and he told me that for every day of this year, he had to participate in a janazah. That there were people dying almost every single day of the year. Tonight we're going to be looking at janazah, but from a very practical point of view. And the whole idea is really to give you practical tips of how to understand this topic and this issue, so that when we are confronted with any of this in our lives, that we'll be able to be in a better place of how to deal with this. Because this is a topic which generally for a lot of people, they are not really connected to any of this until something happens to a very close family, whether your mom or dad pass away, and then suddenly so you're thrown into a world where you have to figure out all this stuff. We are accustomed to going to janazah, but being at the end where you are a very close person and you are now in charge of making all the decisions, it becomes a very difficult thing. And so tonight, hopefully, we'll be in a better place to be able to understand some of this. We're going to be covering two parts, really. We'll be looking at the whole janazah issue, and then briefly talk about the journey of the soul. We're not going to go into detail with it because we will have a further session down the road in which we will talk about the whole thing in terms of Yawm al-Qiyamah and so on. So let's get started. The first thing to understand and realize is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. One second, let me just minimize this here. ثم إلينا ترجعون. That every soul shall taste of death. And Allah used the word taste, which has its own tafsir. And so every single person who was born will one day taste of death. And death is just another stage of our journey in returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as he mentions right here in this ayah. And then to us you will return. When someone passes away, we usually say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That from Allah we come, and to him we will return. We are journeying back to. And the Muslim is asked and encouraged to live your life with the desire to live as long as you can until Allah decides when you will be leaving the world. So we are not a people who wish for death. There are some exceptions, like in the battlefield, if you want to wish to be a martyr and so on. But generally, the Prophet mentioned, no one should desire death. You shouldn't say, oh, I only wish I should die now. Things are so hard that I just want to die. We should try to desire to live as long as we can. For the more life you have, the more opportunity you have for doing good deeds. And if you are doing wrong things, you have more opportunity to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet mentioned a case of two people, very pious people. One of them passes away and then they will get the Jannah, but then the Prophet mentioned the other one who passed away a year after. He will be in a better, higher place because he had a whole year to do more good deeds than the one. So we should desire to live as long as we, as much as we can, as long as we can, with quality lives, and not desire to die. Now, so let's go into when someone dies. Usually someone may die either in a couple of places, either the hospital, which is where most people die, because as soon as you see someone gets very sick, we take them to the hospital. And so a large amount of people die in the hospital. Now, if you are in the presence of someone who is just passing away, you will see that their eyes will close. And then If it is not closed, you should close it, because sometimes the eyes follows the soul, and the soul departs out and the eyes follow. Sometimes it stares upwards. So you should close the eyes. You should make sure that you close the mouth of the person, even if you have to tie something to keep the chin locked in, because sometimes the chin drops. And I hope I'm not sounding too, what's the word? Sometimes this is stuff which people can't take. So sometimes the mouth drops, and then you have to make sure that you tie it in a way that so it stays there before rigor mortis sets in. You should remove any kind of extraneous stuff from the person, jewelry, rings, because their fingers and all of that may begin to swell, and it will be very difficult to take off those rings and bracelets and nose studs and all the other stuff that people have as decorative things around them. So you try to remove all of that and try to straighten their arms and limbs as gently as you can, to straighten it, not to break it, don't force it. And if you're in a hospital setting, then the nurse, they will begin to take off all the different things that is attached to the body. And sometimes they have what is called body plugs, in which they plug in the body. And if you remove those, sometimes it starts bleeding very much. So leave those plugs in. Try to get the toes straight, tie the two toes together to keep the body straight. So you want to keep the body as straight as possible, the arms by their side. Don't allow the hands to be twisted and, in different places. So do not interfere with trying to cut their nails and trim their beard and all of that stuff. You have to leave everything as is and just try to straighten the body to be able to be in that position. Now, if you're at home, you have to call 911, and they have to come, and then they will begin to do their process. If you're at a hospital, then the hospital will ask you which funeral home that you should call, because the hospital's job is to get rid of the body as quickly as possible. And so the hospital will keep it for you for a while, but they will quickly ask you which funeral home you want the body to go to. So that means before death happens in your family, if you see someone is beginning to get sickly, you have got to begin to make arrangements. Now, on my notes that I'm going to send you, in South Florida, there's two main places that we go to. One is called Fred Hunter, and the other one is a Muslim cemetery. I have placed there the contact number for the Muslim cemetery. It's cheaper and it's more convenient, because you can do the funeral at 6 o'clock in the night after you come from work, because they control everything there. And so I have placed in the notes, one of the brothers who attend this class is one of the main person, Brother Riaz, who I have also placed the cell number in the notes here that you can call him. Myself and him work together in terms of the Nurul Islam part of it. But he generally works with the Muslim cemetery, and so anyone can call him from anywhere. You want to call your local imam if you don't know what to do. And usually they are pretty well versed in directing you how do you take care of this person that has passed away. When someone close to you passes away, it is very a traumatic thing that happens, because a lot of families don't expect it to happen. The person might be 90 years old and still we don't expect them to die quickly. We're still thinking that they're going to be the next 10 years around. And so no death seems as if it's, oh, we knew it coming. Always people and families seem to think it hits them unexpectedly. So there are a couple of important things you need to do if you are one of those family members. And so, number one, you have to immediately decide who is going to be the spokesperson that is going to speak and make all the arrangements on behalf of the family. When we get a call about someone has passed away and they ask us, the first thing we do is to say, who is the official speaker for the family? We are not dealing with 15 people. because what happens, this uncle called and he wants it to be done in a particular way. That we have been through many things like that, in which two of the children want to have it in different ways. They want to have different arrangements, and it gets very confusing. So we always tell the family, figure it out among yourself. And when you have decided to have one spokesperson, that is the person we're talking and making all the arrangements with. And we are not speaking to anybody else in the family to deal with arrangements. So you have to make sure that your family member, whoever it is, becomes the official spokesperson. And then you have to go and make the arrangements with the funeral home in terms of the date and time of burial. We are generally, in our religion, you must try to bury people as quickly as possible. Not because you don't love them, but because their journey is finished on the earth and they need to move on to the next phase of their journey. And so we do not delay burial. It is important to announce to the community the date and time of the burial, and let as much people know, because part of the obligation of the community is, at least some members of it should try to attend the janazah. The family should also decide who is going to lead the prayer. Generally, it is recommended that the imam leads the janazah. I know in some, like in South Florida, different places, we are accustomed to selecting a family member, but really the first prerogative goes to the imam. But it is nothing wrong if a close family member wants to lead the janazah, as long as they are qualified and they know how to do the prayer. That is perfectly fine. In terms of the other thing that people panic about is the cloth, the kafan. Where do we get that? Do we go to, start going to cloth store and buy cloth? What's the measurements and all of that? Alhamdulillah, in our area and in most places, the Muslim cemetery, you can ask your imam and they have already prepared kafan. You may have to pay a small fee, 20, 25 or whatever it is dollars for the cotton, but they will have it already cut and set up, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you have to figure out if you're going to have a program, if how are you planning. Generally, the religion don't really have anything called viewing, but family members do want sometimes for their families to come and have a final view. Usually for myself, I don't announce the viewing on my telecast, my robocall that I do to the community. I don't say there will be a viewing, because it is not something that's part of the religion. So I would use other words and says, family is asked to gather at certain place and so on. The less you encourage that, it is better for us. We do not speak ill of the dead. When someone passes away, sometimes family members may, say things that is negative about the person. They may be in the middle of an argument with that person, or they may have some bad relations with that member who have passed away, or some family baggage. We do not speak ill of the dead. And then the family has to also start to begin to see who that person owes in terms of debts, so that they could begin to make arrangement to pay off those debts to whoever is owed. The main focus, though, when you have someone pass away, is focusing on getting the bath, getting the janazah, and getting the burial done. That's the main priority. Now, who to bathe the dead? In most community masjids, they will have people who will assist you, because this is something which you don't do every day. But it's important. What we try to do is to encourage some of the family members, the male members, if it's a male, or female members, to come out and be part of this process. Generally, you want people who are trustworthy and honest, they're a practicing Muslim, and that they have some little idea, even if they don't, but some small idea of how to bathe the dead. If they don't, then the person who's in charge from the community will help them along. But it's important for them to become part of this process. It also provides closure, because if a father dies, the son may not be practicing Islam, but his presence there, seeing his father and feeling that satisfaction that I participated in the last rites for my dad, is something that is very, very it provides a sense of closure to that person. So we usually encourage the family members to come out and be part of the team. We don't give them much to do, but just their physical presence that is, there. Generally, men wash men, women wash women. There are some concessions for spouses to wash each other. And if it's small child, then it can be washed by either male or female. But the bathing of the dead is a very important part of the process of when someone passes away. Now, when you're going to go to do the bath itself, uh, you've gathered your people and you have the facilities. There's a couple of things that we need to know. You have to be very careful and gentle when you're handling the body. This is a person, and even though they have passed away, it's not a piece of flesh or something that you just push and tug, and even though they may not have feelings to understand what you're doing, but we have to be gentle in how we're dealing with the body. We keep the body covered, private parts covered at all times, and then we basically remove any kind of bandage, tubes. We press the stomach, make sure that all the feces are washed out. We remove any impurities, and then we perform wudu. And then sometimes we would wash the body with soap as well, starting from the right and the left, and then you dry the body. So this is an important aspect of bathing the dead. And in most, whether it's Fred Hunter locally here or Muslim cemetery, they usually have the facilities well set up in which you will go in, they will give you a gown to wear, you will have gloves, and now you'll have masks and all of that. So there's a great deal of protection. For COVID deaths, we don't do any ghusl for them. They get buried directly. Because the COVID deaths come to us in bags strapped up, and so they go straight for janazah and burial. So there's no ghusl being done for COVID deaths or similar kind of deaths. Once you've finished bathing the body, then we have to shroud. For men, it's 3 pieces of cloth. For women, it's 5. And you lay them in down, and they have it's difficult to describe it, but you lay the strips of cloth down, and then you will have where you fold one, and then the other, then the other, then the other. And so for women it's 5 pieces because it's an extra piece for their breasts and their head. And once these pieces of cloth is wrapped up, it's important to know that we are asked to bury everyone in pieces of cloth. You're not allowed to wear a suit and tie and fancy dress when you die. You don't dress up like if you're going to some kind of a wedding. I recently did a wedding. A couple called me and their mother wanted to be buried with. Sometimes they insist they have to have paraphernalia. Well, this brother, he went to Hajj and this was his ihram, and he wants to put these things in the grave, the coffin, and they want to add pictures and generally the Muslim burial should be as inexpensive as possible. It should not be a burden on the living. And so it's 3 simple pieces of cloth or 5 pieces, and then we shroud them. Sometimes even the coffin, we will take out the cotton inside the coffin and place the person there in that coffin, ready for burial. Now, the Janazah Salah is also very simple. Now, there is a difference of opinion in that the Hanafi, they consider the Janazah Salah not as Salah. They consider Janazah Salah as Dua. And so for them, the whole Janazah is considered a Dua, because they said Salah means you have to have ruku and sajda, the definition of Salah. So this is not really Salah. This is Dua. This is another way of Dua. Whereas the Shafi and the others, they said it is Salah. And so because it is Salah, the Prophet says you cannot have Salah without Fatiha. And so for the Shafi, they would recite Surah Al-Fatiha. First, so the Imam will stand and say Allahu Akbar. And then if you're Shafi and the others, you will recite Surah Fatiha. If you're Hanafi, you will recite Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa tabaraka asmaka wa ta'ala jaddaka wa jalla sana'uka wa la ilaha ghayruk. There's this extra piece, wa jalla sana'uk. This is an optional piece. You can recite it without it. If you're accustomed to saying Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa tabaraka asmaka wa ta'ala jaddaka wa la ilaha ghayruk, that is perfectly fine as well. Or you could add wa jalla sana'uk. And so this is called a sana. So you can recite Surah Fatiha or the sana. You don't recite both. All right. So once you say Allahu Akbar, that's the first recitation that we will do. So you say Allahu Akbar, you tie your hand and then you recite that. Then the Imam will say Allahu Akbar. You have an option to either raise your hand and tie it again, or don't raise your hand at all. Just keep it tied. And then we recite the Durood Sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim, to the end. This is a very well known what we call Durood Sharif or Dua Ibrahim. And it is a dua that we make that we say, shower your blessings upon Muhammad and the followers of Muhammad, as you have showered your mercy upon Ibrahim and the followers of Ibrahim. And so it is asking us to shower the mercy on Muhammad as we did Ibrahim alayhi salam. So that you will read after the Imam says Allahu Akbar a second time. And then the Imam will say Allahu Akbar a third time. And here is where you can make your dua for the deceased. There are many du'as that are made, different forms. The most known one is Allahumma kfir li hayyina wa mayyitina wa shahidina wa ghaibina wa saghirina wa kabirina wa dhakarina wa unsana. Allahumma man ahyaytuhu minna fa ahya lil Islam wa man tawaffaytuhu minna fa tawaffahu ala al iman. That, oh Allah, forgive those of us that are alive and those of us that are dead, those of us that are present and those of us that are absent, those that are young and those that are adults, our males and females, O Allah, whomsoever us you keep alive, let him live as a follower of Islam, and whomsoever you cause to die, let him die on Iman. And so this beautiful prayer is what is read for the deceased. If you don't know that prayer, then you can also say Allahumma kfirhu warhamhu. O Allah, forgive him and have mercy on him. Allahumma kfirhu warhamhu. And then the Imam will make the fourth takbir, and then he will say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sometimes you will be in a janazah in which the Imam will only say the right side. If you have a situation like that, you need to complete the left side. Sometimes the Imam will do both loudly. In either case, the salam has to be made both to the left and to the right. And that completes the janazah. And it just takes about a couple of minutes. For it's a very practical prayer and very simple. The most critical, the third part of the prayer, or the compulsory part of the janazah, is the fourth takbir and the standing. So those two must be established, where you're standing up and at least four takbir must be established. Now, immediately following the janazah, as we mentioned, the janazah is dua, so you don't make any other dua. You immediately take the body and begin to prepare for burial. Now, so we go to the cemetery, and when you go to the cemetery, sometimes families want to carry the body. So we have got a way between the cultural preferences matched with the practicality of our situation. So you will have situations where they want to park the hearse 3 blocks away and then have people fetch the coffin, walking with it to come towards the grave. But you can also have the hearse bring the body straight to the grave, and so the family don't have to carry it as far. And this is a personal preference that families make. Some people, they grew up like this, and that we walk with the body, and they want to have that experience, and so they do that. Now, whilst you're engaged in this, we should not be having vain talk, idle talk. People should not be joking around. You should try to actually be making zikr and, praying for our brother or sister who you are about to bury, reciting Quran to yourself, and be in a mode of submissiveness and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't have music at our funerals, and so you should not be playing any loud music at the funeral. When you enter the cemetery, you are asked to greet those people who are in the cemetery that have passed away. Assalamu alaikum ya ahl al-qubur. Now, it doesn't mean that they will respond to you, and there's a long discussion about whether the dead can hear you. The dead cannot hear you. There was one exception in the time of Uhud, in which the dead was allowed to listen and to hear. But generally, the dead does not hear. But we have to make the salam when we go in. Now, one of the things that happens a lot of times at the burial ground is that the communication begin to fall apart, because you have to keep making sure that whoever is organizing this funeral, not only from the family, but also from the masjid end, that they are always updating the family about what is happening, so that they feel a sense of comfort and ease. We should be educating them whilst we go along, that this is what is going to happen, this is what we're trying to do here at this point in time, so that they are following along, because most families, they are not really educated about most of these things. And so it is important that we educate them. Generally, the graves, they will have two parts sometime, like a lower part that is smaller, and then the upper part. Sometimes the graves have a side niche in which the body is lowered and placed in the side niche. So there are different arrangements that are made in terms of that. And the body should be lowered gently. Usually here in South Florida, we would, before we bury the dead, we would open the coffin, and we would turn the body slightly facing the Qibla, and we would put like some dust and a little bit of soil and to keep it there. As the body is being lowered, you can say Bismillah wa ala millati Rasulillah, in the name of Allah, on the creed, religion, and faith of Rasulullah. Once the body is in and then the dirt is covered, we take 3 pieces of stone, and then we throw it over that grave, and we recite minha khalaqnakum wa fiha nu'idukum wa minha nukhrijukum taratan ukhra. That from the earth we created you. Then you throw the second stone, and you said, and into it we will return you, and from it we will extract you back again at another time. And so everyone present, they do that. Now, that will ensure that you have a proper burial, proper janazah, and a proper ghusl. Now, there are a bunch of miscellaneous issues concerning janazah that we need to be aware of as well. We mentioned one of it just now: do not speak ill of the dead, but only about their good deeds. Number 2, when someone passes away, we recommend that we bury them as soon as possible. You don't wait for an uncle that's going to arrive 1 week later. Number 3, we do not put wreaths or flowers on the deceased or on the graves. There's a practice that some people may have in which they pick a piece of branch and they put it on the grave. And what happened, this is a misunderstanding, because in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was 2 people that had passed away, and the Prophet picked 2 branches and he put it on their grave. And this was a very specific instance of only those 2 people. So it was not a general rule that every person that passed away, branches should be placed on their graves. As you know, the Prophet lived in a desert. It's the most difficult thing to find a branch or to find flowers. And so this was not what we are asked to do. Flowers, we don't put flowers or we don't get wreaths and put them on our graves. We are asked to make them, leave it as is, like that. You're allowed to put a marker. No. So all the whole industry of flowers, we want to keep flowers for happy occasions. You also don't want to add any personal or sentimental items onto the coffin, pillows and jewelry, and you're throwing things into the coffin and the grave and so on. We do not encourage that. That's not what part of our religion. And then is this moment when it's very emotional for people. We are asked to try our best to control outbursts, screaming and shouting loudly, and you see people how they behave is, oh, why he left now, and they start screaming and behaving. Usually if you see people begin to behave like that, because people grieve differently. Some people grieve quietly, some people they scream loudly and they feel, hold their chest and their heart, and it's a lot of animation, and it's just the way they grieve. And so if people begin to behave like that, we should try to remove them from around the grave and take them aside, and help them to compose themselves. The other thing that is really important is to try as hard as possible not to put the deceased person to be in a situation where they have to be embalmed. So sometimes your uncle died in New York and then you want to bring them to Florida to bury. And so in order to do that, they have to be embalmed. I'm telling you, I have bathed people who have been embalmed. It's not the same. The person is very stiff. It's like a wax. You're almost like you're bathing a waxed object. The water is just running off. It doesn't even feel like a person, because they have to inject all those liquids into the body to keep it embalmed, the embalmed fluid, and it really, really changes the way the whole person is, and it becomes very difficult to even, when you're doing the bathing of the dead. So if you can allow your relative to be buried wherever they die and don't have to put them through to be embalmed. And if you have an option of whether an autopsy should be performed, you should, avoid doing it as much as possible and let the person pass away. But if it becomes necessary, then you have no choice. You have to follow up with the funeral home to get certificate of burial and, so that certificate and so on. Make sure that the debt of the person is paid off, and settled as early as possible. And as I mentioned, you can put the marker. Now, don't again spend thousands of dollars to make an elaborate monument over the burial site. You should put a simple marker that does identify where this person is, who they are. We're not asked to spend a lot of money trying to, because it doesn't benefit the dead. What it does, it causes a lot of hardship on the living to maintain that. And so, we have been saved from that, because the whole idea with Islam is that the dying of a person should not stop the living of another one. And so we don't have to, every week you got to go and put flowers, which is a very expensive thing. Every week I got to put flowers on the grave as a sign of my love and undying love for the grave. No, you make dua, it doesn't cost anything. So we are freed from that of tying the living to the dead in such a way that it becomes a difficulty for them to live their lives comfortable. So all of that has been taken away from us. We don't have those burdens. We let the person go, and our dua is enough to continue to help them. Now, there's this big issue of women going to the burial ground. Generally, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you have this big controversy, and Aisha said that the Prophet never prohibited them from doing it. Their general practice was that the women didn't go, but she said when he did not stop them from going. And so sometimes you have the women that comes to the cemetery. They should, uh, sometimes the sisters are very emotional. And so we need to watch and make sure that they don't, we have to keep an eye on them if they're there to make sure that they are okay. And you will find a lot of the imams are against it. And so they will say it's haram. And they don't want the women to be at the burial ground. Generally, when you come to a funeral, if you're not sure what to do, it is good to consult the imam or whoever is learned person there before you start doing strange things. We don't want to have, the worst thing you want to have is an argument begin to take place at the funeral of someone, and so we've got to make sure that we have competent people in charge that takes care of the janazah properly. The janazah is fard kifaya. It is a communal obligation. If few people go to the janazah, then it absolves everyone. If no one goes, then everybody becomes blamable. And there's a hadith of the Prophet in which he mentions that if you are able to get 100 people for your janazah and they ask Allah for intercession for you, you will get intercession and for Allah to allow you to have a good situation. And so there's a lot of superstition sometimes surrounding the death. You need to know that these people who have passed away, they don't come back every year to say hi to you. And some people believe once a year, all the dead, they come back and then they visit the homes of where they die and so on. This is not true. All right, they move on. And so what happens exactly? Now, when someone dies, we don't have any real way of proving or knowing what is happening after someone passed away, because no one has actually come back and told us what exactly happens after you die. And so we have to depend on revelation. We have to depend on the prophets of Allah who came and who brought revelation and said, this is what happens. And so a lot of what happens after death is not something that you could scientifically put in a lab and prove. And the scientists, if they say that nothing happens, then that is not a scientific statement, because science is based on you have to have evidence based on observation, and then you develop a hypothesis. To say nothing happens is a conclusion that you don't have any way of proving. And so science, the most they can say to us is that they don't know, because there's no scientific way of concluding nothing happens. And so science does not help us in terms of understanding what happens after death. We need to depend on revelation. And as we mentioned before, we are a people who believe in the unseen. We believe in things which we cannot see. And we put our word and our trust that Rasulullah ﷺ was Al-Amin, the truthful one. And when he came, whatever he said to us, we believe. And so a lot of what is now coming here is based on the belief and the teachings of revelation that has come to us to help us to have a little bit of understanding of what happens after we pass away. So there's a long hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that explains some of the things that happen. And I have included in the notes this hadith. I will read it, skim it over very briefly. And it says, when a believer is about to depart from this world and go forth into the next, angels arrive. This is for the believer. Angels arrive with faces as bright as the sun, and they descend from the heaven and they sit around him in throngs as far as the eye can see. So when you're about to pass away, the angels come and they form like this large pathway where they are on both sides all the way up to the paradise. And they come and they descend around the person who is about to pass away. And then the angel of death comes and they sit at the head of that person and says, good soul, come out to the forgiveness and pleasure from Allah. And then the soul emerges very easily, like if you have, like what they said, like a water skin, those containers that have water, and you squeeze the bottom, just how easily that water will flow out. That's how the soul leaves the body, very easily. The angels take hold of that soul, and then they wrapped it in a perfume shroud, and then they begin, that smells very sweet, and then they begin to take it upwards towards the heaven. And when they go, they will pass company of angels who will say, "Who is this good soul?" And they will say, "This is so and so." And the angels will mention you by the names, that the best names that people used to call you by, your most favorite names, not necessarily the name that you have official. So you may name Abdullah, but people used to call you Abd, or something that was a kind of a nice name that you're comfortable. They will refer to you like that, by which people call him. And then they will bring him to the lowest heaven and ask for the gate to be open. It will be open, and the angels who are near Allah from each of the heavens will accompany him. And then Allah will say, "Register the book of my slave in Illiyin," which is one of the way in which it's also mentioned in the Quran, and then take him back to earth. And so the person will get registered in the book of Illiyin, and then the angels will take him back. Now, when he comes down back, then he will actually be hovering over the body. It will be like hovering until that body is buried. It will stay hovering over the body. It will hear, but it can't communicate. And then finally the hadith goes on, where then when the burial is complete, the soul is returned to the body, and two angels come to it, and they make the body sit up, and then they begin to question, "Man Rabbuk, who is your Lord?" And the believer will say, "My Lord is Allah." And they ask him, "What is your religion?" He says, "My religion is Islam." And then they ask him, "Who is this man who was sent among you?" And he will say, "Rasulullah." And then the voice will declare that, "My servant have spoken the truth. Spread out the carpets from the garden for him, and open the gate of garden for the garden for him." And then some of the perfume and fragrance will descend on him. We don't know what form this takes and how this body will be united with him. This is in a realm that we cannot fathom, but this is what the hadith mentioned. Because someone may die with this body blow up to smithereens. You don't even actually have a physical body. What Allah is telling us, there is a way in which He will find to get that body to be fused with the soul. And then that person will be told, "Rejoice in what delights for you this day that you have been promised." And it will continue that the person will be glad for the last day to come to be reunited with their families. The hadith then continues to talk about what happens to the disbeliever, and his circumstances is completely different. His soul will be pulled out from his body, like when you take, like if you have like wet wool and you have piece of iron stick up between the wool, and you're trying to pull that piece of iron from that wet wool. How difficult a task is that, and it's very, very painful. That is how his soul will be extracted from his body. And it goes on to mention about what's going to happen to that person when the angels take him up, with black faces descending, and rough cloth and so on. I have the hadith that you will be able to read it and see what happens. And so then, after the questioning, the soul will go to a place called Barzakh. And Barzakh is like it's an intermediary place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have created, where the souls are going to be there until they return for question and punishment on their judgment. And so the soul will make many journey back to the grave with the body, and back and forth, but they will be by and large in this Barzakh. There will be some punishment in the grave and some reward in the grave. We don't. We're not going to go too much into that. Uh, but there are some few souls that will not be in the barzakh in the way that the regular people will be. It's mentioned that the souls of prophets, they will actually be occupying parts of the heaven. There are some souls that will be in birds that are flying about in paradise. These are the martyrs. There are some souls that are imprisoned just outside the door of paradise. And so there are some souls that will be in different circumstance of goodness, some in bad situation as well. But by and large, all the souls will be in barzakh. Now, lastly, when someone passes away, there are some things you can do for them. The most important is dua, to ask Allah to forgive them and have mercy on them and to give them Jannah. The dua of especially the children is critical. The Prophet says when someone passes away, everything stops except three. That is, if he has knowledge that he had spread and it continues to benefit people, or she has something that she taught people and continue to benefit others, then they will get the reward for that. Or if they have righteous children who will open their hands and make dua for them, and ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them, that will elevate their status in the paradise. Or lastly, if they had some charity that they did, some projects which continue to benefit people, that they spent or they built or they established, then those will continue to benefit them. So that is why when someone passes away, as part of trying to do something for them, and that's the beauty about it, is that even though they have died, they can still continue to get rewards. It is important that whatever goodness that they have done in this world, that you allow that legacy to continue, to thrive, to grow, so that they will continue to get blessing. You can also make hajj on behalf of them. People also, they feed, like they give water to thirsty people. A lot of the scholars in the Middle East, some of them, they would actually put free pipes in front of their yards outside in the street, so that passers-by can, desert, it's hard to find water. So they will install pipes outside their yards, so when you're passing on the street, you could, drink some water from them. And there's a way of their giving sadaqah to people. You can fast for them in Ramadan, spread knowledge on their behalf, recite Quran. So, but the most important thing is the dua. And so, even though we may have passed away, our effect and our good deeds that we do in this world can still continue to benefit us long after we have passed away. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to live lives that are so useful and good that even after we die, people will continue to benefit from them long after we leave. So this is a brief idea of some of the things in relation to Janazah, and hopefully it will help us to navigate that issue. The practice of 9-day work and 40-day work and so on, they really have no basis for them in the authentic Sunnah. And I know people have 40-day work and they do this kind of things, but it's really not part from our deen. As I said again, the religion tries not to tie you, that the dead has this continuous obligation that you have to keep going back and doing things. It allows us to continue our life. Our dua is what is the important thing.